Dominica from any type of foreign invasion or internal insurrection. Parcell was only had him, 2 wives, and 12 followers, which was a very small portion of the entire Maroon community. The vast majority of the Maroons still were uncompromising and still continued to resist enslavement until 1814.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have another question at this time, Dr. Chambers?
I don't.
Okay. We'll come back to you in the next round. Next, Professor Akassi.
Yes. I would like to congratulate you for your excellent work. And I think it was very thorough. It was something like, it was familiar to me in the sense that like I work also on African diaspora in this world, Francophone, Hispanophone, and Lusophone world. And one thing I want to say before I ask you a question is like when a work is good, that raises a lot of comment and question. So nothing to harm your work on my comment. No. It's to just show you how good and excellent was your work. My first question before my comments, because if you answer to my question, then my comment won't make any sense. So that's why I want to begin by my question. Why you refer to Dominica as a Pan-African nation?
I didn't refer to Ireland in its entirety as a Pan-African nation, but the Maroon community within the island, I refer to them as a Pan-African nation, because I think that they recognize the plight that they all face in this society based on white supremacy and slavery and so on and so forth. So I think that you see them kind of like the Maroons kind of opting out of allying themselves during the French Revolutionary War and so on and so forth. But then they're reaching out to the enslaved on the plantations. So I see that as a Pan-African ideology that's being developed in Dominica at that time. And I say Pan-African because it was based on, their blackness gave them all a common enemy. And even though the Maroons and the enslaved Africans on plantations lived in different locations and so on and so forth, but they realized they had the same enemy. And that's where the Pan-Africanism, I think, comes from.
I think in this sense, maybe something like you may consider for the future is to see the connection of the Maroon in the Americas in general. Yeah. Because if you see the concept of Pan-African nation, for instance, is very interesting because, in Mexico, there was the case of Yanga, Gaspar Yanga, and he was on the 17th century. Okay, so this can be a connection to see how this maroonage, like maroonage, influenced the Maroons, for instance, in Dominica. Yeah. And also you have a case of Bencos Bioko in Colombia. So how also this one could have influenced the Maroon in Dominica. And another interesting aspect is talking about Pan-African nation. When we were talking about something to consider too, when we were talking about the idea of the Igbo, the huge influence of the Igbo, I think is very relevant, but at the same time we can add, like the Igbo were not representing the Igbo in terms of a micronation. They represent the African philosophy in general. Yeah. Because at the end, if you notice, you talk also about the Mandingo philosophy as the soul as a transmigration, right? This is in all Africa. Yeah. I don't know if you know the issue of Liberia, but Samuel Doe, who was the former president, before they killed him, they were taking apart all his anatomy. This is part of this philosophy. But in this case, the philosophy is not only the transmigration. For the African culture, sometimes one part of your anatomy represents the power, the spiritual power. So this philosophy is not only for Igbo. So it's relevant, but at the same time, I think it can be more Pan-African.
Yeah.
And the second comment is about the African radical tradition you were talking about. I I agree with the author. I don't know. It's Cedric. His name is Cedric Robinson, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, my small comment about that is about the fact, like you talk about black Marxism. When we talk about radical, over there, we talk about radical African tradition, intellectual tradition, the paradigm shifting should shift also and go above the Marxism, because the Marxism doesn't take into account the race. It takes only into account the class.
Yes.
So we should do this big paradigm shift also there. So he has a good point in the sense like as the historical point, you can use the Marxism as a philosophy, but to go to the radical African tradition, you need to go above the Marxism, because the Marxism doesn't take into account the race. One of the clear examples is the Moscow. They have a University of Patrice Lumumba there, but they're one of the more racist on the earth. And because they don't take into account the concept of race. They're taking into account the concept of class.
Okay.
That's okay. If we could move on to Tali.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say hi to Glenn, Dr. Chamber. Glad to hear from you. This is a great work. Hi. It's always fascinating to read and learn about this topic. I'm much familiar to Brazilian case, Brazilian Quilombo and so on. So your work brings something new for me because we're talking about island and how everything was played in small place and how violent it could be. Because Brazil is huge, people could flee now in Amazonia for, so Portuguese took almost 70 years to crush the Republic of Palma. So this was very fascinating for me to read this work, and it's very rich in terms of information. And he's right. I mean, because it's rich, we have a lot of observation, and or not. So, first of all, I mean, the map. I need a map. It's like reading military. I want to see each rebellion where was it located, for example. So next time, try to put.
I have a map on this copy.
Oh, this is the last
Sorry.
Really? Need a map. Okay,
I'm
next
sorry,
time just try to put it. Page 15, you talk about the fact that they were fighting, against modernity. I'm not sure that this is the case. I mean, these people, they were fighting against, let's say, the way modern economy at that time was using the need, specific need of that economy to enslave people. So this was their main goal. When you see the example of Quilombo, the Quilombo of Brazil, for example, the Palmar, because it took, 65 years, so it took time for them to organize and to try to deal with the new situation, which means that people who were there using a technique that they brought from Central Africa. The Quilombo tradition came from Central Africa, the Imbangala people. But they also tried to take something from, their former master. They were free men because they created their own society. Some of them were Congo Christian. They were Christian before being enslaved. They were already Christian. Some of them could read Portuguese, and they were fighting against the system. Not about the modernity that could be the whatever you could call modernity. So I think you need to see this because I don't think that we're fighting against modernity. Just about some name, I am part of the UNESCO committee now. We are trying to decolonize the discourse. So when you next time try to pay attention about the name. For example, if you say Mandingo, some of my colleagues will just scream. But Mandingo is okay. They have their own name, so try to work on it. About Nzombi, okay, this is word coming from Bantu, language from Central Africa. Depending how you say it, depending on the phonetic variation, you have Jombi, darkness, Jombe, heaven, Jombi, X or hatchet. So the same word that can refer to specific situation or symbol of something. The heaven is, when you have Zulu, Hama Zulu, the son of heaven, we say Jombi, Jombi, the heaven. So your source is not very rich. I mean, Google it, but next time trying to see another source, to see the phonetic variation of one concept, and that gives you different meaning. So I stop here. Thank you.
To answer the question about the fighting against modernity, I understand they were fighting against enslavement, but so were the Haitians in the Haitian Revolution. They were fighting against enslavement as well. But they were seeing that the elite class was trying to integrate into modernity. They were trying to be recognized as a modern state by France and some of the other European colonial powers. And they wanted to engage in trade with these European colonial powers. But there was a tax involved in wanting to be recognized and validated, and they put a debt on Haiti because of that, and it made the Haitian people suffer. So I think the difference between what Haiti was trying to do and what the Neg Mawon were trying to do, the Neg Mawon weren't interested in being validated and recognized. They weren't interested in being integrated into this whole modern state system that we have. And I think they were willing to do whatever was necessary to remain absolutely free and independent in the interior of Dominica. So that's when I say they're fighting against modernity. They weren't just fighting against slavery, they wanted to make sure they remained free. Because some people, and I think the people, a lot of the masses in Haiti would agree with this, that at the time at least, statism equaled servitude, and that's what a lot of people ended up fighting against when they created the Lecoux systems in South Haiti under Alexander Pétion.
Yes, Neil, as you know, I thoroughly enjoyed the dissertation. I think it's fabulous. The research is extremely solid and vast. I agree with my colleagues. Great dissertations, they have a lot of space. The challenging, they make strong arguments. Strong arguments tend to get strong questions. But it's great because it's like iron sharpens iron. You wrote this very courageously, and I appreciate that. I think this is an era of scholarship where we don't have to be safe. We don't have to play defense. It's time for us to express ourselves and not be afraid when our ideas don't match up to, how we're told, we should be. But in doing that, of course, you do raise questions, but I think it's okay. For me, this was a work that reminds me of my own work on Bermuda. It does a number of things. It shows that resistance is not something that's bound to the biggest spaces. It interrogates different questions of maroonage. I think the piece about these transatlantic networks is really, for me, really fascinating. But similar to Glenn's question, and we talked about this as well, the project for you is much about maroons and enslaved population. As you move forward to the book project, we talked about maybe other relationships. So, for example, what's the connection with the maroons and the free black population? If there's this exchange of goods, then what happens if we unpack that and look at the free black population? So I think we talked about that. Maybe you can speak what you think you might find, and did you see any sense of that in the documents, basis, which would give you maybe a base to go further to explore those relationships?
Yeah, good question. After we spoke about that on the phone, I decided to go back through the notes and look into it a little more. And a lot of the times, the free black population in Dominica was used to hunt down the illegals. And especially in a place like Martinique, this is also the case. So, and I think this is one of the reasons why I think that Farcel was very skeptical of Apollinaire. Apollinaire was a mulatto from Martinique, and the mulattoes in Martinique were notorious for being the ones to basically maintain status quo. They were allies of the Grand Blancs in that island. And Farcel, being a maritime maroon who traveled back and forth between islands, I think he had knowledge of this. That's why I think he was kind of skeptical of it. And in Dominica, it was pretty much the same thing. But there were some cases where the free black population was communicating with with the Maroons, and that was the one time where the French Revolutionary letter was being passed around in 1794, and it got to Parcell's hands. That person was a person of color, but it was a French Revolutionary sympathizer. And then I think the other time was in 1811, when Rigaud from Saint Domingue passed a letter to one of the free blacks in Dominica, and it's basically trying to get the Maroons to participate in the takeover of Dominica there as well. But I think, in generally speaking, the vast majority of the free black population, of the modern population, was used to maintain the status quo.
I'd like to make two comments. As a U.S. historian and a descendant of an enslaved person from Virginia, I think it's important to understand that African Americans formed gangs and were employed by the British, as you said in Chapter 5, to raid the plantations, and they did it. Very importantly, I'd like to refer you, and I have a whole list of sources. There's one great work by scholar F.R.E.Y. Frey. It's called Between Slavery and Freedom, Black Resistance in the Revolutionary Age. Also, I think that we have to accept that, and you tease this out well, but I'd like to, when we talk about connections in the Americas, I'd like to help you with that, because these contested boundaries between night and day are very important. That night is ominous for whites, because African Americans, no matter where they are, they quickly learn the landscape, forests, swamps, waterways, and paths. They're quick to learn it. Very importantly, once we learn it, we can create these refugee communities, whether it's quilombos, whether it's, as my people in Virginia, in what's called the piney swamps. African Americans create this nocturnal world of potential freedom. And I think that's one of the things that you say, so you bring out well. They're in Virginia, again, I'm in the U.S.
Yeah.
So I would like us to share the fact that there's this trial of this enslaved person named Sam in 1813 in Southern Virginia. And one of the big problems is that Sam can move about in these contested areas. And he's a problem because he keeps going and getting people and taking them into the swamps and can't get them out. And so in letters, one William Cabell to Joseph Cabell, it starts from 1830 up through 1813 through 1830. There's this constant issue of these Africans moving about. And I think that's very much what you've done in your work, that you are showing how these same issues are important. And in terms of their importance, we can, again, as my colleagues have both said, these are these international issues that once we take the time to look at them, they're very similar and the parallels are there. But it takes a new boldness in scholarship to understand we have to say it. Other people can apply or even skirt around it.
Yeah.
But it's critical to say it, and you did that well. I have several other points I'd like to make, but I'd like to concede my time to my senior scholar, Dr. Carrington. Whatever I have to say is secondary.
I had no thought that I would share in such. But anyhow, all I want to suggest to you is that because of the separateness of the islands, and because they were entities, Dominica was removed from the British in 1963. So that when you look at them, you look at that they all grew from Grenada, because you have the enslaved people, you have the maroons, and you have the colons. And then, of course, you see the problem is when you have the colons, you have a problem because you have a mix of races, and so they want to safeguard their interests in the island, so that when you look at it again, or when you choose another piece of work, you can look at the entire region to see if you can make a connection.